Joining us now from Washington is Shira Toeplitz, congressional reporter for Politico. Thanks for being with us, Shira.
Thanks for having me.
Let me start with this. Is paying for congressional security something that the taxpayers can afford to do?
Well, look, we have a huge deficit. We're about to reach our debt ceiling, actually, of $14.3 trillion. So it's really a question of what we can afford at this point. We really can't afford much, period. But look, if congressional leaders decide that they want to spend this extra money, they certainly have the power to do so. It's part of the powers of Congress. They can do it. And I just want to remark that when Speaker Boehner was elected last week, he implemented a 5% cut across congressional offices. So each congressional office's budget is 5% less. A representative from the House, a Democrat from Illinois, has already asked to introduce legislation to increase that 5% back so they can pay for security. It's certainly something that's up for debate.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of what is being debated is how much and how far should they go with the security. Congressman Peter King from New York wants to make it illegal for someone to carry a gun within 1,000 feet of federal officials. What are the chances of something like that passing?
You know, I would say in terms of whatever kind of gun control legislation could come out of this, its chances are a little bit better, but it's far from a done deal. I talked with Congressman King today, actually, about it. It's interesting. The legislation he's proposing is very similar to the legislation they have for schools. Right now, it's illegal to go within 1,000 feet of a school with a loaded weapon, with a firearm. And he wants to do the same thing for members of Congress, except people have to knowingly go within 1,000 feet of a member of Congress holding an event.
So how do you implement something like that, though?
Well, his idea with the legislation is it's kind of a two-pronged approach. He wants to make it so people who can go to congressional events and feel safe anymore. Obviously, in wake of the Giffords shooting, he said he's personally had people call his office and say, don't hold any more events. This is a bad idea. Well, as a member of Congress, you have to be in touch with your constituency. So this is what he's doing. He wants to create legislation to, I don't want to say make people feel safer, but to put something in place there. The other thing he mentioned is it also gives law enforcement the power to ask people, are you carrying a weapon within 1,000 feet of this event? And it gives law enforcement a little more power to check things, to check for concealed weapons, that kind of thing.
So that's primarily how you implement something like this, or will there be metal detectors at these, you know, your congressman on the corner events, or how will they do this?
Right now there aren't metal detectors 1,000 feet from a school, so I don't think they will use metal detectors. I will think it'd be more like cops kind of surrounding a perimeter and having the ability to ask someone, are you carrying a weapon? And if they are, they have to move out of the 1,000-foot perimeter.
All right, so there's another congressman, Indiana Republican Dan Barton, who wants to introduce legislation to install Plexiglas separating the visitors area from chambers of Congress. How do fellow members of the House feel about that?
Well, I think that's an interesting piece of legislation, because right now you can't bring any kind of firearm into the House or into the Capitol complex. It's just not allowed. An aide to a Virginia senator accidentally tried to do it a couple years ago, and he ended up in jail for the night. So, you know, it's not very possible. I think members of the House, it's highly unlikely. Look, it's also a PR thing. You don't want to, as an elected official, feel like you're closed off from the rest of the world, or that you're above the rest of the world. You know, much of it is very much a PR battle at this point. You don't want to seem like you're far and above your constituents. It's just not good public relations.
Actually, I wanted to touch on that, because couldn't measures like this really further the distance between Congress and the public?
Yeah, it dances across that line very closely. On the one hand, you know, as a member of Congress or as a politician in general, you want to be someone of the people. You want to be able to connect with your constituents or the people who voted for you. But on the other hand, as a public official, you need to keep yourself safe. So it's a delicate line they bounce, and especially, as I mentioned earlier, with the deficit getting towards, and the national debt getting towards $14.3 trillion, you know, every dollar counts. You have to justify spending all of this extra money for security when the nation's already very much in debt.
Well, here's something that we do know. Gabrielle Giffords is improving, but we still don't know the full extent of her injuries. What is the protocol for what happens to her seat in Congress?
You know, this happens sometimes, especially with older members of Congress who have to take leaves for, you know, long-term surgeries and that kind of thing. While she is in the hospital or during her recovery, if she can't come to Washington, the short answer is nothing happens to her seat. If she still wants to serve and she's made every intention that she continues to serve, nothing happens. No one votes on her behalf. No one votes said of her. There's no temporary special election. Just the seat is vacant and she doesn't vote, period, end of sentence. If she were to decide after all of this that she didn't want want to run again, or if she wanted to leave Congress early, or she felt like she couldn't really serve, then the governor of Arizona would call for a special election and they would fill the seat.
Well, of course, we do hope she makes a speedy recovery. Shira Toeplitz from Politico, thanks so much for your insight. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.